I was on my way to the newspaper rack in the library, something I do most every day, when I noticed a feller sitting at the long desk, thumbing through a stack of documents and papers. Lying to one side was a small, worn journal book. The sight of the cover, even after so many years, stopped me dead in my tracks. I couldn't help myself, and I disturbed the gentleman's study. "Excuse me, young man," I said. "If you wouldn't mind, I can tell you the story of that little book." He appeared to be irritated at the interruption, but nodded an okay without meeting my eye. I pulled out a chair and settled across the desk. He said his name was Dr. Hitchcock, and that he had traveled from the university in Austin to do research on the early history of the Panhandle. Lita Schwartz, our librarian, had provided her collection, and the journal, still resting on the table, was a small part of the materials. "Well, it was quite a few years back," I began, "but I'll never forget it. The old man carried the box with him everywhere he went. You'd see the one, you'd notice the other. He dressed from a time long gone, with his pants stuffed in tall boots, and an old floppy Stetson hat with a wide brim and an everlasting sweat stain for a hatband. He seldom spoke to anyone and went about the town as little more than a shadow. Most knew the old codger lived in a small lean-to down by the Santa Fe crossing, having come to town, as best as anyone could recollect, sometime after Teddy Roosevelt took the White House. The few who paid any attention to his comings and goings wondered what was in the box tucked tightly under his arm, but none ever approached the old gent to ask. A group of young toughs in town did try to steal it once, but the old feller roused himself to the cause and fought them with the grit of a younger man. He did keep title to his box. One day old Charlie Roundneck, while making his morning milk run, happened on the old man limply propped under a red oak tree. His head was tilted back at an awkward slant, and both eyes were staring into the sun through the gaps in the leaves. Charlie delayed his rounds to let Barney Sampson, the town's undertaker, know of his discovery, and Barney, being the good man he was, took care of the burying out of his own pocket. Nothing fancy, mind you, just a pine box and a blanket. There appeared to be no family to see to the final arrangements, and Barney didn't cotton to the county government disposing of the remains of the dispossessed. Barney instructed little Teddy to collect the old man's few possessions and stored them in a dark corner of his basement to be disposed of at a later time. The wooden box he let rest on the corner of his desk. It was about 9 inches on the long side and was nailed shut. The faded remnant of a branded star was centered on the lid, and Barney from time to time curiously stared at the box, wondering about its contents, but he never bothered it. He figured someone might show up, some relative or friend, and he'd pass on the only thing the old man had that might have had a value. Nearly a year went by, and the box remained unclaimed. The old man was as lonely in death as he was in life. So Barney and a few of us agreed we needed to open the box and see what it held. We reasoned, a bit late possibly, that it might be a will or maybe the names of kin. After prying loose the square-headed nails, we found 3 things packed inside. There was a crumpled, undated pay voucher from the Crooked Star Ranch, promising to pay the bearer $45. There was a ragged, faded bandana and a small brown journal book with a plain, unmarked cover. Inside the cardboard cover of the journal, neatly lettered in lead pencil, was the old man's name and a one-line romantic reference to a girl named Jenny. The second page displayed a title. It read, "My Recollections of the Roundup and Trail Drive of 1891. Jeremy Stackwell said he didn't have his reading glasses with him, and he wondered if Barney would read the contents out loud to our small group. The rest agreed, and we gathered around Barney's desk to listen. The story inscribed on those pages proved to be the damnedest thing we'd ever heard. We all sat as still as the surface of a pond in late summer as we listened to the tale for well over an hour. The writing on those pages revealed the old man, now buried out there in Lone Oak Cemetery, was one of the last riding wranglers to work cattle over the Jones and Plummer Trail. It was a trail described in the journal of some 168 miles stretching from the Texas Panhandle to the railhead at Dodge City, Kansas. In smudged pencil, the journal described the ever-present dust of the trail, the stampedes, and the cyclones that often rolled over the prairie like a great wave. The narrative brought to life the treacherous river crossings that claimed many a steer and a few careless cowboys. There was discussion of the outriders, the lead and the drag cowboys, and mention of the bosses and the near bosses called the segundos. In the pen of a poet, there was melodious descriptions of the trail cutters, the rustlers, the broncos bunched in the remudas, of the kid cowboys and their pranks and picadillos. The old cowboy had paid a special mind to the cookie, who he often called Sally, and the never-diminished chuck of beans and sow-belly, always to be served up quick with an irritated disposition. The saga continued with hundreds of details of the rugged and unpredictable life on the cattle trail in those days. When Barney finished, all was silent. For myself, I sat there and wondered why I had never seen fit to say anything to that old man. His stories would have certainly been worth the effort. I guess in a way we all missed out. Then again, maybe this fella, who had seen and lived so many adventures from another time, had preferred to be left alone to his memories. After a while, the group in Barney's office began to struggle with the notion of what we should do with the contents of the Old Cowboys Box. The voucher wasn't worth anything. The Circle Star Ranch had blown away with the trail dust when the railroad came to this part of the country. As for the bandana, it was nothing more than a rag, as devoid of its original color as bones bleaching in a summer sun. As for the journal, we realized that it was something different. Its soiled and faded pages communicated something rare, a first-hand account of a history long gone and mostly forgotten. The pages were written at a time when most men couldn't even write their names, but this cowboy could do that and much more. As such, it was a treasure, for sure. By concurrence of all that had heard the words of the journal that day, we decided to write out a copy, and when finished, I agreed to take it to the library so that anyone in town who might be interested could take a look at the tale. The originals we rebundled, and Buster Singletary volunteered to repair the damage we had inflicted on the box as best he could. Buster was our town handyman and could fix might near anything that was broke or bent. The next Sunday, Barney and the rest of us took Buster's handiwork to the cemetery. The ones who could still bend their knees solemnly scratched a hole over the old cowboy spot and slipped the box and its contents beneath the soft dirt, replanting with bare hands the tufts of grass we had disturbed. We just stood there for a while until Barney, with a voice that cracked a bit, said that he felt a need to pray a few words. We all bowed our heads. Dear Lord, I know it ain't right to expect to carry anything in this old life with us when we enter your blessed world, but in this case we will ask you to make an exception, if you would. This old cowboy who's resting at our feet didn't talk much when he was among us, and I'll bet my pocket watch that he didn't change his ways when he got to your open range either. So we suspect he might have needs of the words in his journal to help testify to his character and history. They are fine words indeed. And for as much as we matter, those here today can assure you that he was a true cowboy in life and in heart, and as such, he deserves your sweetest mercy. Amen. Well, mister, the prayer ended the story, and that little book in your hands is the copy we made all those years ago. In silence, I watched the professor feller finger the pages of the journal. I'm pretty sure I detected a tad of moisture in the man's eyes. Before we parted company that day, he did say that he was delighted with the discovery and appreciated my story. He promised me he would have the journal published as part of his work. I can't say that he ever did, but I suspect that the old cowboy would have been a bit full of himself at the notion of such a thing. There is one thing I'm certain of. Wherever that old cowboy is, I bet you that box is tucked tightly under his arm.